Hey, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Tech Strong Women. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Chief Operating Officer over at Tech Strong Group. And I am I feel so privileged to have these ladies on today's inaugural program. Tracy Bannon, who is my cohort on the show. She's going to be joining me for most, if not all, of these shows. Tracy is the Senior Principal Software Architect and DevOps Strategic Advisor over at MITRE. And I know that's a very long title, but Tracy, thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. And then we also have, as our first guest, Jennifer Leggio, who is the she's a Chief Marketing Officer and kind of a serial techpreneur, if you will. So Jennifer, thank you for being on the show. I just want to, I'm going to ask both of you guys to tell the audience a little bit about yourself. But before we get started, I wanted to kind of level set, talk about this show a little bit, what we're on about here. And first of all, we do want to emphasize that this is a show about celebrating technologists, not simply just women. We put the women label on the title series because we want folks to understand that technologists are the male, female. We are on equal level in the technology field. Now, that said, there are a number of things that females have had to challenges that females have had to deal with as they rise through the ranks in technology. And we will be covering some of those things as part of our discussion. But really what we are here to do is to celebrate technologists of all ilk, and with a heavy emphasis on women in technology and some of their stories. But we want to talk to folks about where they've been, where they're going, why they are there, and hopefully provide some takeaways for everybody in technology as part of that. So Tracy, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that description.
This is about being authentic. This is bringing forward all of these other technologists. And part of this will represent a little bit of my journey. Charlene, we've talked about this as we've gotten to know each other over the last year or two, that my journey, I didn't realize that I was the only woman in the room because I was so tech blind. I had a job I needed to do, something I needed to get done. And the further I've gone along in my career, the more people have reached out, men and women, asking for help in navigating, asking for how they can be allies to one another, how they can bring thought diversity to the table. And that's what helped me to start this part of my journey. But I've been the technical person in the room for a long time. So I'm excited about this. Very excited.
I'm super excited too, because I firmly believe that a lot of times the voices from the female technologists have not been heard as much as the male voices have. So hopefully we are giving females a megaphone to get their voices and their opinions across, as well as being able to share their expertise. So with that, I want to introduce Jennifer Leggio, who is, as I said, she's a Chief Marketing Officer, serial entrepreneur, or techpreneur, if you will. So Jennifer, why don't you tell us a little bit about your current role, what you're doing, and basically how you got here, because I know that's not where you started. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm really excited about this conversation. You guys have already touched on a couple things that I'm really hoping that we dig into, and I'll lay that out a little bit. But for me, I am a dyed-in-the-wool security marketer. I've been doing security marketing now for about 22 years, minus I took a year out for a different area and then came running back like I was screaming for my mother, kind of coming home because I missed it so much. And I have been in the CMO role or marketing executive role for at least the last 9 years or so. And I'm a startup person. I love coming into startups and either building them from scratch where they haven't had marketing presence before. And that's everything from the operational side to the comms, PR, the messaging, the technical marketing, what have you. And then other times it's a turnaround situation where I come in and the company's kind of stalled for some reason and they're trying to get to the next. And so they bring me in to help with that. And that's my passion. In terms of how I got here, I actually started out as a journalist at a little newspaper in Southern California. And by journalist, obituary writer is what I mean.
Goodness.
So I went from writing obituaries to writing about security. So that was an interesting transition. And it was a quick one. I was living in Southern California. My roommate decided to move to the Bay Area. I'm like, I can get a job in PR. I'm a journalist, even though most of the people I interviewed, well, I didn't really interview them, let's be honest. A little tiny PR firm called Dovetail does not exist anymore, specializing in security clients, took a chance on me, and that's all she wrote, so to speak. So here I am.
That's great. That's great.
I love your obituary story, by the way, because I've got to believe that what you learned in writing obituaries, kind of like looking over the measure and length of somebody's life and the things that they impacted, that has to have bled into marketing. Like being able to look at the full measure of something that a company is or does.
It definitely is. It definitely helped me fine tune my empathy, which is, I think, a very important quality of a marketer as well as a leader. And because, in that situation, it wasn't that, I would have to sit down with these families, and I was 21 years old. I was a baby. And, I'd sit down with these families and talk to them and hear their stories. And I couldn't be like, all right, let's get on with it. Like, no, never. Right. Sometimes they just wanted someone to listen. And I think that turned me into a deeper empath than I naturally am. And I do think that empaths make the strongest marketers because when you care, you do a much better job. And maybe you can say that about any profession, right? I just happen to be a marketer. So that's what I'm saying. So
it's so funny that you started with obituaries. I actually, journalist also, started with weddings. So we both
we're both in those special sections.
Right. So go figure. But it's interesting how you kind of springboarded onto marketing from journalism, because it really, it's all about storytelling at the end of the day. And so even today, it's the ability to tell a good story is really what kind of separates the wheat from the chaff when it comes to not just journalism, but also marketing and pretty much anybody who has to interface with other people. And frankly, these days, who doesn't? And, but telling the story sometimes can be difficult, if you're not, if you're not the strongest voice in the room. So I wonder, Jennifer, how has that kind of impacted the way that you go about doing your job?
It's hard because, let's face it, security marketers get a bad rap, and we deserve some of it, to be perfectly honest. You see it happening. I've seen a ton of it happening in the last week or so with Log4j, right? Like it's all over the place, right? The FUD, we could have solved your problem, the victim shaming, all of that happens. And I firmly believe that needs to stay out of marketing, and you have to be creative in, I think the masterpiece of a marketer is storytelling without scaring people, informing them, giving them unique insights, and not just throwing fluff at them. But that's not easy to do. And it's the secret sauce and how to do that comes from, really depends on if you're trying to build a blog or a messaging platform or a rapid response. My first go-to 99% of the time when I'm trying to come up with a new project or that's around a story, whatever that delivery mechanism is try to talk to a customer. Yeah. So I get into their head, because I can sit here in my Kool-Aid drinking vendor world all I want, and I can even talk to the guys and gals in my company that are on the front line, but there's nothing about hearing the reality of it. But sometimes you still get pushed back internally, even there, and from, a lot of the times that sales teams that want you to go out because they want to bring in the sale. They want to bring in the sales, and they're like, we don't care how it comes in the door. But it's my job as CMO to be the guardian of the reputation as well. Yeah. So there's a really strong balance there, really fine balance.
I love something that you just said. You used the word authentic. right? I'm seeing this with all of the folks that I guide and that I help as well. And given that I'm so focused working with government executives, right, helping them, the empathy needs to be there at every level, especially if you're dealing with software and software intensive systems and you're dealing with security. But authenticity comes with a need for people to be able to story tell. And storytelling is not telling fibs. I think that's another thing that we have to lay flat, is that storytelling is simply how you lay out the story. So it's not scary. What are the objectives that you're trying to get across to them? It may be important to rattle them a little bit, but not in a way that you're fear mongering. So I love that authenticity and storytelling. That those are such key things that we've got to have more people like you being that guardian. Imagine if that guardianship was owned by everybody in your tribe, in your entire organization. To make life a little bit easier, maybe.
I would hope so. I think people also forget that data. I think there's a great Brene Brown quote that I've forgotten exactly what it was, but I think she said, I'm going to misquote her. I'm sure she'll listen to this and be very upset, but it's data, words are just data with a soul. So she said something like that. I believe that data can be a remarkable storyteller. And it doesn't have to be something that's written down. It's like, if you can paint a picture for something about the impact of what you're doing or what you've done, whether it's for an external perspective or sharing results of something you've done internally, if you can do that with data, that's the most powerful way to get your message across.
And it's something that people don't refute, right? If you're looking at data, right, it's not as though it's heavily opinionated by someone or another. It can be. People can skew numbers and skew other things. But in general, if you have access to the raw data or less curated data, boy, there's a lot that it surfaces. That's a strong technique. Yeah, I love it.
And data is like the great equalizer, right? So there's no gender associated with data. It either is or it isn't. So it's really hard to kind of say, well, I'm not sure if what you're telling me is really correct because, for whatever reason, you present the data and it's right there for everybody to see and they can accept it or not. But it's really hard to argue with what the data is presenting sometimes.
Absolutely.
So do you think is that a technique that you've used, Jennifer, in hearing about your career progression and knowing that you are a serial entrepreneur in all of this? Is that a technique that you've used throughout this? And I'll bring in the as a woman. Is that something that you've needed to leverage as an enablement tool?
I have. Actually. I kind of, like I mentioned, when I started, it was in public relations and then just kind of moved to broader marketing as I got more experience. Going to the as a woman thing, it's very interesting because, and I really respect, I've worked with some amazing men who are very supportive of women, and I've worked with some men that were not, and work with women that were also not very supportive of women. I think that's an important one people forget, right? And for some reason, there are people that are able to just shout malarkey from the rooftops and they'll believe because they have presence and they're a man and they've got 30 years of experience. And I'm like, all right, well, here's what's going on. But then I've got to create this whole presentation with all these data points that's sourced from Salesforce or a communications cloud or something like that. And a lot of times what will happen is, well, why didn't you then in the end, it's because I think people realize that when you feel, how do I put this? I love data storytelling. I mentioned that already. I hate using it as a defensive tool because it shouldn't have to be a defensive tool. And I think sometimes when people realize they put you in that position where you had to give them the data versus you being excited to give them the data, they realize it. But that's a whole well we could go down in terms of, women proving themselves versus how men prove themselves. And I'm sure in your role, both of your roles, you have some stories as well. But yeah, data has been my armor for a very long time. And it shouldn't have to be. I'd much rather have it be just like the shiny thing that I love to show but it's the shiny thing that protects myself and my team. And that's just a reality.
But that's, I often, in the roles that I take, where I have to help to lead the decision-making or provide the decisions, I call that having defensible decisions. And so it's been important to me from the very beginning, but for a different reason, that I could track back and say, I've made this recommendation and here's why. Here's the facts. Here's the things that are supportive of this. It is good. It's always such a positive experience when you walk into a meeting and you don't have to lead with that. When you can lead with your experience, and when the audience wants the opinion because they know it's experiential based, they know it's not just something subjective. Those are those moments where you go, yes, I think I can do this another day.
And there's those small wins. Oh, sorry, go on.
That's okay. I was just going to say, but there's also something to be said about a gut feeling, and everybody has gut feelings, no matter if you're male or female. One thing I have noticed is, a woman having a gut feeling isn't taken as seriously as a man having a gut feeling. And obviously that's a broad statement, and that, there are exceptions to every rule. But for some reason, if somebody says, if a male comes in and says, this is the way I think we should do it, and they don't really have the data to back it up, but they have the experience to back it up. And then a woman comes in and says the exact same thing, and she too has the experience to back it up. There's a very good chance that her opinion is not going to be taken as seriously. And that's something that I have noticed on, in my position in working with multiple companies. That is just not something that people are willing to take as seriously. Right. And I wonder, is that something that you guys have noticed as well?
Well, isn't gut instinct, it's based on your experience, right? That's where gut instinct comes from. Right. So yeah, if they're not trusting your gut, then they're not yet trusting your experience set. But yes, I've been in meetings where I've made a point, and I've not laid all the data out, but I've made that point, only to have somebody else come along, regardless as to gender, make the same point, almost exactly the same words, and it receives accolades, or it is well received, and wow, that's an amazing idea. And I'm like, didn't I just say that? Were my words, was it the inflection that it meant? And so I actually become very introspective at that point, and have sometimes taken that on as though I may have somehow not conveyed it correctly. And what I've grown to find out is it depends on the audience that I'm with. Sometimes I'm not being as succinct and as specific as I need to be. What's your experience with that though, Jennifer?
I've had the same experiences. It's you throw out an idea and somebody else articulates it, and I think women do this more than men. Immediately I start self-analyzing. What did I say? How did I say it? Was my message not clear enough? Or do they just trust this other person more than I do? And it becomes this whole thing in the back of my mind. And then the bad thing about that is it's kind of taking me from being an active participant in the rest of the conversation, where I can really provide the input. But yeah, that has happened. And I like what you said, Tracy, around how gut instinct is experience. And if they're not taking the gut instinct, it does make you wonder if they trust the experience. I've also found that, at least in the last couple of years, I've seen this a lot, where I'm in meetings, mostly virtual, of course, in the last couple of years, but in meetings where men will enter the room or enter the conversation, and I sometimes keep a tally of how many times they start a suggestion with how many years experience they have. Well, I've been doing this for 30 years. I kind of made a joke about it earlier, right? Like, I don't do that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel like I need to remind them that I'm not 12 and that I've been around a little bit, but I've noticed that. And I'm wondering if maybe that's not a negative thing. Maybe that's setting the tone of, look, I've been doing this a long time, where I would like to think that anyone, male, female, whatever, whomever, right, walks into a room, and just by the fact that they're there, if they're there, their opinion was valued enough to be invited. Yeah. Therefore, nothing else should have to be said. Right. But it doesn't work that way. So then I start to think about, well, do I need to advertise myself more? But that's a waste of time and seems really egotistical. But people do it and people listen to them more.
Oh, but it's not egotism. Someone took me aside a number of years ago and I'd gotten I'm an A student. In my head, I got to get the A. And I had a performance evaluation that was meh. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't what I wanted. And we had a sit down conversation. And part of it was, you're not tooting your own horn. I'm like, well, why would I be so arrogant? Why would I be out here tub thumping? I'm doing good things. Like, yeah, you're doing good things, but people don't necessarily know about them. Or that part of your experience is that reputation is not preceding you. Mm-hmm. So it was very interesting to work, and this was a man, to work with him on how do I appropriately toot my own horn? How do I appropriately, it's not how I've been here for 30 years, but it is, well, I've been doing this for a while. And here's a specific experience that I want to talk about right now. So it got us away from, I had 10 years, you had 12 years. It got us away from that. And it got it more into a relevancy of the actual experience that we wanted to talk about. But I thought that was kind of a corollary to what you're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, there's this perception that, and maybe it's just the way that females are brought up versus males, but there's perception of, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, it's just my job. I'm not supposed to advertise every single day exactly what I'm doing, but that's what people need to hear, so if we have a meeting and people are asking me, well, what are you working on? Well, I'm doing my job. I'm doing this. I'm not advertising like, oh my God, I had a great meeting today. And we got some things really hammered out. And and this could just be the way that, like I said, men and women are brought up. I'm not one to go out and advertise myself. And Tracy, what you just said really hit home with me, because I do believe that actually holds women back a lot, because of the fact that they're not, maybe it's a comfort level. They just don't feel comfortable speaking up about their accomplishments and their experience and pay attention to me. This is, it should be assumed that because you do have that experience and you do have that set of capabilities that you should be taken seriously.
Well, we're working against generations, though. As we're bursting through this, we're going, okay, I'm going to talk about my relevant experience. I know my mom didn't, and I know that my grandmothers didn't, and I know the things that they would say to me. Like my grandmother would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I started talking about things. She said, it'd be so great if you could be a teacher or a nurse. And they were very gender oriented things, because that was the world that they lived in.
Right.
And my mom was the first person that was like, you don't have to listen to them. But at the same time, it was interesting because, there's still, I'm the middle child. I am the first daughter, but I'm the middle child of, my brother is the only son of an only son. Right. And so you can imagine all of those things that cascade with that. And I'm not 21. And I think if I were, as I'm seeing the next generations growing up, they're coming into this a little bit differently. I think you were going to see, I'm hoping, knock on wood, that we're going to see younger folks in their careers better able to articulate impact, because it's got to be, the story has to be an impact story, not number of years, not number of degrees, not number of certifications, but this was my line of thinking and this was the impact that I drove. Yeah. And that's very different for all the generations right now as we start to turn that corner.
I'd love to see more of that. I hear people talk about meritocracy and how it should be about what someone's accomplished and not years on paper and not those other things. So I think, there's discussion, but I don't know that, at least like some of the older generations, and I include myself in this, are just still fully comfortable on even how to, one, I'm not good at doing it myself or demonstrating it in the way that I'd like to demonstrate it in order to mentor the younger folks on my team to be able to not shield themselves with data and worry about, do they have the experience to be in this room and all those things. So I guess that brings the bigger question is, while we're learning on our own to show our merit and do it in a way that doesn't have to be like, here's my LinkedIn profile or what have you. How do we mentor, especially younger women in our industries, in the tech industry, to be able to grow without having to defend? And I actually think about that a lot because I have a team of young women and I try really hard, but I haven't cracked that code yet.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to ask them that question and to see what answer you get, because there is the very good possibility, and I believe this, that they're not thinking along those lines, and that's because, with every generation, to your point, Tracy, things get more and more. There is greater parity between males and females. It is less about gender roles with each successive generation. And so I hope that, the next generation doesn't have to have this conversation that we're having. And it doesn't have to be an ongoing conversation, because right now, we've been having this conversation. I've been having this conversation for 20 plus years, and every single time somebody's brought up to me, why don't you do a discussion about women in technology? For a long time, a very long time, I bristled at that. And I said, why? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to have a discussion about women in technology? Why can't we just have a discussion about technology, people in technology? Why do we have to keep setting ourselves up on this stage and saying, look at us, we're women? And so, what are we doing now? We're kind of having that conversation, but I think what we really wanted to accomplish with this is just celebrating the fact that there are so many diverse voices out there, and there are so many stories, and there's so much insight to be derived from these conversations, whether it's about the way men and women work or communicate, or whether they can say certain things in the office. That's a whole other conversation for another time. But it seems as though when you bring up the topic of, say, women in technology or women doing whatever, to the older generation, Jennifer, to your point, the older generation, they're gonna view it a different way than the younger generation. And there's a very, very good chance that the younger generation is like, why are you guys doing this? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't have these issues. They might one day, especially if they have an older boss. So I guess as much as anything, I would like these conversations to be just kind of food for thought for that younger generation as well.
So I'm going to ask a leading question of Jennifer. So when I hear all of this, and Charlene has heard me say this before, I want to be in charge of my adjectives. I want everybody to know technologist. That's the noun. That's what I am. But in terms of what my adjectives are, I want to define those. There are times where I'm going to talk to female students, and I will go ahead and say I'm a woman engineer. But not in every conversation do I lead with that. Sometimes it's woman, sometimes it's real, sometimes it's cloud, and I provide that adjective. So I want to ask you, we've said that you are a security marketer, right? And you spend a lot of time being a CMO. What other adjectives do you have? What are the ones that you're like, this is me. These are my adjectives.
Oh, goodness. Security marketer, CMO, you mentioned that. Woman leader. And I feel that's important. And back to kind of what Charlene was just talking about, I hope that because we are having these conversations now, younger women keep saying things like, why do you even need to talk about that? That's a win, right? And they don't have to think about their adjectives. But you asked me a leading question, but I have been told in the past, I've been in security, I mentioned a long time, not to tout my resume, but a long time. But I've been told many times by true technologists that are actually coding and teching and all those things, that even though I've been in tech for 22 years, I do not have the right to call myself a technologist because I'm only a marketer. And I can't tell you how many times that has come up. And I feel like that's something I owe to my marketing brethren to bring up, because you don't have to be a coder to be a technologist. It's an ecosystem. Technology is an ecosystem like anything else. And there are people that play different roles, have different talents. And, it's interesting that, and this isn't gender specific at all, because I know this happens to my male colleagues. Why is that? Is it a lack of understanding of what we do? Sometimes I get like kind of like little like punchy, and I'm like, well, we help you get paid, so shit. But it's not. I don't want to be salty about it, right? I really want to be constructive. Why is that? And I ask you from a technologist perspective, right?
I think because we're just learning. Until recently, it was tech. All right. And so IT is over here, business is over there. And so I spend so much time meeting with business experts so that we get business agility and technology agility aligned, so that we're solving problems and we're delivering value. So we become part of a team now. So if I used to be that I thought techie was somebody who has a degree in this or they're hands-on coder. Sometimes I'll use the word tech savvy or code savvy, because it's like being the child of an undertaker. You understand the entire business, even though you're not the person who's doing the embalming, right? Or your father is a fireman, or I grew up in a household with educators. And so I understand that business, but I'm not an educator, but I sure as hell can talk about it, and I sure as hell can sell it. So I think that's really what you're saying is, what defines even being a technologist?
Right. Yeah. And it's not an educational thing, right? I mean, you don't have to have a degree in technology to be a technologist. I mean, so many people have, like Jennifer, for example, she's a journalist by degree, but she's chief marketing officer, and she didn't go to school for that, but she can walk the walk and she can talk the talk. So, there's something to be said about in the trenches learning. And again, I also think that there's a bias associated with marketing in general. And especially if you're going up against a population who doesn't necessarily think of it as on par with what they're doing. And so that certainly is not gender specific at all. That's got more to do about, with an inherent biases toward particular roles.
Well, let's come back to diversity is the name of the game here. We're talking about diversity. We happen to be more focusing on the female part of it, but it has happened to me more than once in the last few years where I've been in a conversation, and the conversation has been about education. And it's been about educational diversity. And we have some folks with software engineering, and we've got some people with systems engineering. Oh, and we have a few over here. And so there are places where those are what would you call it, the yardsticks that they're using so people have all kinds of different yardsticks. It would be nice if the yardstick was experience towards whatever topic that you're focused on, as opposed to different types of pedigrees that may or may not matter. The best architect that I ever met was a fellow by the name of Martin Sheridan. And if he's listening to this, hey, Martin, it's been a while. Hope you're doing well. His degree was in urban planning, and he's fantastic at seeing the big picture. He was just amazing. Does a degree help? Sure. In some of the sciences, can it make a difference in jumpstarting? You bet. Is it always going to be the linchpin? Oh, hell no. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So
it's a great conversation. Jennifer, I'm really interested in finding out where you think you're going to be moving forward. Do you think you're always going to be in marketing, or do you think you're going to kind of move into another role entirely? And how does the relationship that you have with your cohorts, how does that impact your decisions regarding where you want to be in the next phase in your career?
It's very interesting question, very interesting timing for that question. So I've had the fortune, of being able to take on very operational marketing roles, as well as the storytelling, the brand, the creative, all the other fun stuff. Even though I grew up in PR, I've been able to really expand. And I had a previous company that gave me an opportunity to lead a revenue operations team, which is kind of a sales function, sometimes a COO function, right? For some companies, where you're basically looking at data integrity and best practices and everything from quote to cash and working with a finance team, et cetera. And and I really appreciate, it was a company called Flashpoint, and I spent about 3 years there, wonderful people. And I'm really grateful that they gave me the opportunity to step out of the marketing box, so to speak, and learn that. And in since then, I've tried to figure out, I've been like, all right, so I've been a CMO for a while, I've been in marketing for a while. I'm going to move forward. I want to be a CEO, or I want to be a COO, or I want to take on revenue ops, or I want to do that officially codified as my job. And then I sat back and I thought, but I'm really good at marketing, and I really love raising, not to insult my, I call myself mama bear with my team sometime, whether they like it or not. I really love mentoring. I would consult if I didn't love managing. I'll be honest, I would consult, but I love managing and growing teams. But I realized, wait a second, what if going back to what we were just talking about with marketing being respected, right? What if I instead use my voice and use what I've learned because people say, wow, marketing people don't usually own that. What if I use that to redefine what a CMO is and make that an example and help, male or female, help CMOs be seen more as business leaders than just simply marketing leaders. And so for me, next is to be that and continue. It's really to embrace being that level of CMO that's very operational, and figure out ways that I can educate other folks that, like, hey, you can do this too. And you may really love it, because you're going to learn a lot more about the impact of what your job has.
I love the passion that you have with that. I'm working with a woman named Christina Rylander, and her background is 20 years as a government, running PMOs and standing up organizations. And what she has really taught me about the hardcore side of defense is the role of acquisition. And acquisition is a whole area of government. I mean, they don't build software, they acquire software, and there's layers and layers of policy and all kinds of different things around it. But those folks, just like what you're talking about, they are just as important to the conversation, and helping to build a different set of dialogue, a leveling of the playing field. The ecosystem you talked about earlier, that's something that she's doing on a day-in-and-day basis. So I'm seeing that trend, regardless as to the domain space, starting to see the trend that you're talking about there, Jennifer. So what do we do? How do we kickstart it more? What do we do to accelerate it?
I think part of it is people like me and people like her and us on this, taking the time to have the conversations with people and share the examples. That when I was first asked to come on to this, I have the worst imposter syndrome. That's a whole other conversation, right? But when I was first asked to join this, I was like, me? You want me to kick off this inaugural show about tech strong women? That's fantastic. I'm really honored. Why though? And I went through this whole thing. But then I'm like, why? And especially in talking with both of you, I'm feeling more empowered. And I'm like, you know what? I need to stop apologizing for being in the role that I am, and start educating people on what this role can be and what its impact is. And again, not having to use the armor of data, right? And I think that's, at least for me, I think that's the start to it. So now that I've said this to a public audience, I'm going to have to do it. So.
Well, we'll be checking back on you on a monthly basis for the
statuses,
right? No, please.
Yeah.
Please.
But I do think more people should, I think there's a lot to be said for humility and admitting that you have, no matter how much experience you do, whether you are tech savvy or technical or what have you, it's great to be humble in what you do, but if you're good at it and you've cracked some codes that can help other people, I feel like in some ways there is a little bit of responsibility in helping other people, even if it's simply the team that you manage. Mm-hmm. But if you have again, the honor of, like I have, to be in a public show, speak up, and maybe somebody takes something away from it and they go speak up. So I don't know, sounds a little cheesy, I guess, but that's what I believe.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think that it is important that we do continue these conversations, because to your point, talking about it is empowering, and understanding that other people are feeling exactly the same way that you are, I think does more to lift up the collective ranks than any sort of rah-rah meeting can, or buck up, you're doing great, or whatever. It's really kind of digging a layer deeper than what the regular conversation has been so far, and understanding that we're all in this together at the end of the day, and it really does not matter whether we are male or female at the end of the day. It's really what we know and how we can impart our knowledge and what we bring to the table, and to the benefit of everybody.
Absolutely agree.
Tracy.
I'm so excited. I've got so much energy right now. I feel like I need to go talk to more people. Oh.
Well, we are just about out of time, but Jennifer, I do want to thank you for being a part of this conversation. It was truly a wonderful experience, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I do wish you the best of luck as you do move toward a more evolutionary role in marketing leadership. I think it's a great endeavor, and I wish you the best of luck. And I hope we can stay in touch. We'll have you back in a couple months or so and see how things are going with you.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I've had a blast talking to you both.
Excellent. Well, Tracy, you're awesome. You're awesome. I know you're awesome. Now Jennifer knows you're awesome.
Well,
so we'll definitely
glad to expand networks, ladies. And a mark of a conversation, if you ever notice me taking notes, that's when something really resonated with me, because I had to write a word down. And so let me tell you what, Jennifer, you got a whole page. So tons of stuff here, just about information sharing, about authenticity, about not using data as armor, but leveraging it when you need to. I mean, so many good things here. Hoorah! Let's go do more good stuff, ladies.
Great.
So, thank you again. And thank you all for tuning in to the inaugural Tech Strong Women episode. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and we will see you next time.